All right, the next item on our agenda is a presentation by the New York State Division of Housing and Community Renewal. I'd like to invite Deputy Commissioner Pascal to the table. I guess I should say Deputy Commissioner et al.
Two, three. Hello, hello.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So let me start by asking Deputy Commissioner whether you have any prepared remarks or presentation.
Good morning. I actually do. Again, my name is Woody Pascal, and I'm the Deputy Commissioner for New York State Homes and Community Renewal's Office of Rent Administration, also known as ORA. First, let me start by saying we at ORA look forward to continuing to work with you, the members of the board, on issues of mutual concern. And I'd also like to personally thank you for your willingness to serve the people of New York City. Our city greatly benefits from selfless public servants such as yourselves, and on behalf of Commissioner Ruth Ann Visnaskis and HCR, we thank you. So before I go into my prepared remarks, let me introduce to you some of my colleagues at ORA. On my immediate left is Assistant Commissioner Simone Marie Meeks.
Welcome.
On her left is Dan Savory, who serves as my special counsel. On my immediate right is John Lance, Bureau Chief for Overcharge and Luxury Decontrol. And on his right is Assistant Commissioner Guy Alba. And to the back, my senior advisor, who works very closely with members of your staff, and I want to thank him for all of his hard work in putting up with all of my various requests, Mike Berrios. So, Madam Chair and members of the board, as the Deputy Commissioner for ORA, I thank each of you for the opportunity to provide you with some updates on recent activities at the office, and for allowing New York State Homes and Community Renewal to be part of the process leading to the promulgation of this year's guidelines for rent-regulated apartments. As you may be aware, ORA is undertaking a very significant project that's going to cost us millions of dollars, replacing the 34-year-old historical update tracking system, which is our computer system, with a new state-of-the-art computer system. And as you can imagine, the process is very complex and thus involves a considerable amount of the agency's staff and time. Not just ORA, but throughout HCR. Staff members from the Office of Information Technology Services are key to this project and have been working with our vendor to reach out to tenant groups, owner groups, legislators, and other concerned parties to obtain feedback and perspective on their individual needs. We are working vigorously to develop a system that is responsive, user-friendly, and we look forward to a successful launch sometime in the immediate future. When this project is complete, we know that online services for both tenants and owners will be faster, more efficient, and better than ever. So, since I've been talking a little about computers, I think I should stay with that kind of discussing some of the online applications that we've improved over the last few years. We have also made significant updates to the owner rent regulation applications, which we call ORA. This allows owners to file various applications online through the use of a single user ID and password. I'm just going to discuss a few of the programs and applications that we have and a couple that we've got in the planning stages. Annual rent registration. This online application is available in the ORA system. Owners must use Arrow to file annual registrations for rent-regulated properties yearly. One important to filing online annual registrations that the owner can now print certified rent rolls and no longer need to visit a BRO, a borough rent office, for this information. Then we have another application for owners who wish to have apartments rents restored. That is the owner's application to restore rent. That is after ORA is deemed that a service was not being maintained. For example, not having heat or hot water, or a broken toilet, and they want this, we reduce the rent, and they can file online. Owners can also file a petition for high-income rent deregulation online. That came online 2 years ago? About 2 years ago. And one of the other ones that we do, because we provide a certain service, much like how Andrew and his staff do in suburban counties, Westchester, Nassau, and Rockland, we have an ETPA survey, where we ask owners to provide us with information on maintenance and operations costs for their buildings. And lastly, for the owner, I call it the owner side, we're in the process of developing a major capital improvement online application. MCIs, as you know, are building-wide improvements, which are for the operation, preservation, and maintenance of the building that benefits directly or indirectly all the tenants. Examples of MCIs could be boilers, windows, electrical rewiring, plumbing, elevators, and roofs. Now, on the tenant side, we've figured that tenants need an opportunity to be online also. They've got all these applications, they've got their cell phones that they use, so we've made it easier for them and more efficient by creating a application for that they can now report conditions that require emergency repair or vacate orders, heat and hot water complaints, and other service-related issues when an owner has failed to provide or maintain required services or equipment on ORWA's website. So that's 3 separate applications for tenants that they can file with us. In addition, we continue to enhance our case status inquiry, where tenants and owners can check on the status of their cases that are before us, and that has been going very nicely. The Office of Rent Administration's hotline has been revised to offer clients a wide range of taped messages that address frequently asked questions. We get about 500 phone calls a day, and about, I guess, 3,000 tenants and owners that come into our local offices. We have 2 offices in Manhattan, 1 in the Bronx, 1 in Brooklyn, 1 in Queens, and 1 in White Plains. Callers or visitors who need to speak with an information agent can also utilize translation services, which is provided in over 100 languages. Now, in an effort to ensure that all tenants have access to the information that they need, we have strengthened and improved our tenant protection information page. We've added a tenant protection page where visitors can easily access information on rent histories, increases, overcharges, reductions in rent, and lease violations. We have also strengthened our owner resource page, where visitors can obtain information on lawful charges for air conditioners and appliances, access to rent registration forms, and building-wide rent rolls. We continue to work with our private vendor to update and translate our frequently used fact sheets and bulletins into 7 most requested languages. Now, I've mentioned the website, and I got to stay with that for a second, because our website now includes a prominent section highlighted with new things that are happening at the Office of Rent Administration. For example, content can include items like recently revised forms and information, monthly core case processing numbers. For example, in the month of April, 62 rent overcharges were established, where we established legal rents and directed refunds in excess of over $550,000. 191 decrease in service orders, directing the repairs be made and rents lowered until such time the repairs are corrected. 62 lease renewal orders, directing the issuance or correction of a lease renewal, and 95 major capital improvement orders for the installation of items that I mentioned before, in excess total of $16,200,000, benefiting over 3,800 apartments. We continue to work with our partners in government as we continue to expand our outreach efforts by attending owner and tenant forums to better communicate with the public. In addition, ORA staffers have attended numerous town hall type meetings on rent regulation with various elected officials. Now, I'm just about concluded with my remarks. I'm sure you've got a lot of questions, but turning to the proposed guidelines that are before the board, our office has carefully reviewed them, and if they are adopted, we do not foresee any problems in administering them. Now, in conclusion, on behalf of Commissioner Ruth Ann Visnaskis and HCR, I wish you success in your difficult deliberations and offer ORA's continued support and cooperation. Thank you.
So So let's open the floor for questions. Any questions for the Deputy Commissioner or the assembled staff? Go ahead.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and I appreciate that the information is now getting online. How are you educating tenants and owners that these applications and forms are online? What process are you using? Are you writing to them, sending them letters?
We write to them, we email, we send out blasts probably monthly when things are new to various community-based organizations. We have probably over 1,000 or so community-based organizations that we send stuff to. All the elected officials we send stuff also to. The owners are a little bit easier because they're already registered. They're mandated to register annually with us, so we can send stuff to them. We work with RSA and CHIP and the other owner groups also.
So on the owners, you mail to them directly, and the tenants, so these 850,000 units, you send out mailings to them?
No. We send this. The owners are mandated to do stuff. So we mail to them. They're already registered with us. So we have email addresses for them, management companies, that stuff. Tenants, we do not mandate that they have to file anything online. We're building these things for them to make it easier for them. So as we go around, as we're talking to going to various meetings, going to community-based organizations, contacting them, these tools will be available for them to help tenants file some of these things.
So but you don't do any direct mailings to the tenants then?
Unless they have a case before us.
And can I ask you why you don't, because you have their addresses, and you know what apartments they're living in, why not mail them the information?
It would be pretty costly.
So it's a cost issue.
It's a cost issue. The information that we receive that's currently in our database is a snapshot of whatever that registration period is. So maybe Ms. Brown, who was there on March 1st, moved out on April 1st, and there's a new tenant that's there. So there's a variety of different things that would have to happen.
Thank you.
David?
Deputy Commissioner, thank you for helping us with this process. I have a question about the state-of-the-art new computer system. Do you foresee that we would be able to get answers to more granular questions going forward? So I'm thinking about questions such as data about smaller geographic areas than boroughs, and potentially data about buildings. Is that something, because I understand the fields you have in your current system has a lot of granularity, but the summary data that we receive is at a relatively high level of abstraction. So I'm trying to understand if going forward we would be able to get more granular data.
Think of it like this. Think of a 1970 Chevy Nova. We're looking to get a 2017 Cadillac. All of these things, over the years, we have, how can I say it? We're processing things and doing things in the 20th century. This new system will bring us into the 21st century, recognizing all of these things that you're talking about.
So just to be, I'm just asking, so perhaps for next year, if we were to ask some more granular questions, we may be able to get back more granular answers.
Correct.
Thank
If the
you.
system's up and running, yes.
Thank you.
And when do you expect? Do you have a date for the system at this point?
It's-
Or I know in
we're
those, and that's very fluid.
It's a very aggressive timeline, but I just want to make sure that everything is set, but sometime next year.
Sometime next year.
So can I turn your attention to question 28 about MCIs? And I noticed from 2015 to 2016, a substantial increase, some doubling of MCI money requests. And I'm wondering, one, if you know why to account for that. Two, whether you know how many buildings we're talking about, like are we seeing a substantial increase in number of buildings, or is it just an increase in their money requests for MCIs? And how many units we're talking about that are affected by these increases in MCIs?
We'll have to do a little more research on the number of units that we're talking about, but in 2016, we were given an opportunity to get overtime, so we were able to process more cases.
So this might be pending MCI applications.
So some of the stuff carries over from 2015 that carried over, so we were able to.
But the question says amount applied for by owners. So it says that in 2016, owners applied for 308,000. 2015, owners applied for 146 million. So I assume that means that's how much they asked for in MCIs, not that you were able to process them quicker.
Yeah, I'd have to check that for you.
It'd be great to know how many buildings, like if we've seen a substantial increase in number of buildings, how many units that potentially affects. I know we're talking about $13 per room, so it'd be great to have more details around what that looks across the city. And maybe if you have more information, more granular data, like David's asking, is it substantially in one borough or multiple boroughs? You know, as much data that you have that could help us understand the impact of these MCIs would be really useful.
Okay. Sure, absolutely.
Deputy Commissioner, there have been news reports of, or at least allegations of some landlords abusing things like MCIs. Is there any department within the state, whether in HCR or elsewhere, that looks at some of these bigger issues, so not case by case, apartment by apartment, but looks at patterns of abuse by particular companies in the use of IAIs or MCIs?
Well, we do have where tenants will bring up the issue of overcharges, and IAIs are an issue. We would review the IAIs, and the owners would have to substantiate the costs for such. We've done some, on our own initiative, some AI investigations of certain owners who may have displayed certain. Oh, I'm sorry. AI stands for Administrative Investigation. We get into our own jargon, so sometimes we forget. I'm sorry. So we would do some administrative investigations based on services that may have been an issue for a particular building, and then would get referred to the Overcharge Bureau, and we would do an investigation in that sense. But most of the cases we process in terms of overcharges involving IAIs or any of that other issues where owners may be abusing come from tenant-initiated complaints.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And they do a full audit, and they also inspect.
Thank you.
So besides tenant-initiated complaints, how often do you do independent investigations around this information? And the second question just is about the granted MCIs. It seems like, is that number of applied in 308,000 and granted 308 million and granted 275, those numbers correlate somehow? Or are they just whatever was granted in that year? Or is it 95% of what was applied for was granted? Because that's how the number reads to me.
Yeah, I think the numbers, the grant, the Deputy Commissioner was speaking to earlier about certain complaints, or rather applications for MCIs being granted are based on prior pending applications. Yeah, you have the applied for in 2016 were 308,000, and the granted or granted in part in 2016 was 273,000, but they weren't all for 2016 applications that were applied for. They might have been for 2015, 2013, or some earlier year. So whereas the applied for number is accurate for that year, the granted in part number is not just for that year, it's for earlier years also.
So do you have an estimate about what percentage of overall MCI applications are actually approved then? Is it a percentage?
Probably about 70%.
70%.
When you say 70%, are you talking about 70% of the applications or 70% of the total amount applied for?
Full amount applied for.
Okay.
So you can do partial grants?
Correct.
Okay, so that.
So there may be some things that have been knocked out, certain fees that they may have put in, sales tax, whatever. And also remember, in the MCI process, like let's say you want a new boiler, the city has to sign off on that. So we coordinate with the city, we actually check, we inspect, there's Code C violations, we changed the rates in 2014? On the Code C violations, so there's certain things that the owner has to make sure are in place.
When you have your new state-of-the-art computer system, would you expect that you'd be able to look for patterns maybe across buildings owned by the same entity or the same landlord? Would that be some capacity you will have?
That would be more of a function for the tenant protection unit.
But
yes.
you will have the capacity to do so?
Correct.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
I have a question about the preferential rents. Do you have the breakdown of where the preferential rents are found by community board or zip codes?
We have that information. It was given to us, so we have it by zip code and the number of units that have a preferential rent in each zip code. What we'd like to do is put it in some context of a neighborhood, so there's more understanding of where this is. So we'll get that information to you shortly, but a little bit more substance to the
More accessible in terms of being able to correlate it geographically than just zip codes.
And then my second question is, could you walk us through the process of a tenant-initiated harassment claim?
A tenant would file a complaint with ORA's enforcement unit, and the enforcement unit would review that and would try to schedule a conference to see if they could resolve the problem without a formal hearing. Many times that proves successful, and the owner may have to sign a written agreement about what steps, give a renewal lease, fix a continuing service problem, whatever. For those cases that cannot be resolved by conference, or the conference agreement is not adhered to, then the enforcement unit will take formal enforcement proceedings where the enforcement unit attorney acts as a prosecutor before the hearings unit, which is staffed by neutral administrative law judges, and the enforcement unit would make their case before that ALJ. The owner, of course, may be represented and have their say, and then the ALJ would issue a ruling on whether there was harassment and what fines, if there is harassment, what fines would be assessed.
I have some specific questions in relationship to your letter of May 24th, which is in the response to the inquiry of May 8th. Question 2 says, what % are preferential rents below the legal rents on average? And the response gives the average preferential rent, but is there a way to calculate an answer to the question, what % are preferential rents below the legal rents on average? Is that something that we have data on?
Are you referring to our responses to this?
Yes, I'm referring to your 2-page response.
Okay, can we get that guy? Thank you.
question 2.
And in question 2, I think, if I'm understanding it, you gave some data that's relevant to question 2, but I'm not sure if it gives the answer, and I was wondering if we could get an answer to that first question. What % are preferential rents below the legal rents on average? Is that something that we could calculate?
We'll take a look and get back to you.
Thank you.
We'll get the answer.
And then a similar and related question is question 3. Can DHCR determine the ratio of rent-regulated units to total units in each building? And so I see information about apartments and buildings, but I guess it's asking the granular question about in particular buildings. Is that something that you have the capacity to do under your current computer system?
I'm not sure about that one. We'll have to check. I don't think we can get that deep in the weeds on it.
Yeah, it would be useful for us to know, or to know whether under the new computer system, you would be in a position to give us data on the percentage of units within buildings that are rent regulated.
You know what I'll do is I'll actually speak to the vendor and have them reach out to Andrew, and we can maybe have a conversation, because they've talked to other community-based organizations and other government entities. So I think that'd be helpful.
That sounds good.
Just the reason that it's relevant, at least to some of us on the board, is that there's a concern that there may be kind of two kinds of buildings, those with tons of rent-regulated units and very few market-rate units,
Right.
and those with not so many rent-regulated units and a lot of market units, and whatever the board decides is going to have a very different impact on those two populations of buildings. And so we're just trying to get a sense of how big each of those categories are, the ones who have one rent-regulated unit and tons of market rate, and those who have 99% rent-regulated. And then the decision we make will impact each of those universe, or each of those subsectors very differently.
And just to add to what David's point is also this idea of what MCI is, and thinking about how buildings with high numbers of rent-regulated units, where those are those MCIs in those same type buildings, and whether you're seeing a lot of owners who have high numbers of rent-regulated units, and also taking the opportunity to apply and obtain MCIs, and how that overlays with the regulatory status.
Okay.
And I'm wondering, just back to question 2 with David's question here, is, so if we can get the distinction between what the average preferential rents are in the boroughs versus what the market rate rents are, do we also have that by zip code, Andrew? Is that information then been given to us?
The average rent,
The preferential rents versus what the registered rents are? And is that then, can we break that down by zip codes or community boards or whatever method you have available to you?
yeah, I would have to talk further with the HCR about it.
And the other question to HCR is, I appreciate that you have, about 850,000 units that are registered. I wonder if we can break that down a little more about how many units are in buildings that have 10 units or less versus how many are in larger buildings, because we have some income and expense data for buildings that are above 11 units, but we have very little income and expense data for that subset of 6 to 10 unit buildings, and we want to just figure out what that universe really is to determine how much data we're really missing from those owners about income and expense information.
Okay.
Just a quick question about registration. So some units are not registered sometimes for a few years and then are back registered again. Do you guys look at what happens if rents are increased by like large number of, like a large amount, for example, in buildings that we at CASA work sometimes in, I see that like a unit wasn't registered for 2 years and all of a sudden the rent is 60% more than it was 2 years ago. Do you guys investigate what happens or ask questions about why that occurred if it's not initiated by the tenant? Because we know they can do overcharges and that can take,
Tenant
a year or
protection,
more.
that's part of the reason for the creation of the tenant protection unit. They've been monitoring those kinds of things and engaging owners that have, we'll call, dropped off of our system. And if they do see those kinds of things, they contact the owner to try to work something out with them, or in some cases, I guess it goes to your bureau. You want to talk about how it works?
If they can't work it out with the owner, if the owner doesn't justify the increase, TPU will refer it to the overcharge unit, and we would open up an overcharge proceeding in that matter, and we would investigate. And we would review it from top to bottom to see if there is an overcharge, if the increase was justified or not. If not, and there was willful, the owner would be assessed treble damages, and an overcharge would be awarded or order issue.
How proactive are you guys in, like, how many cases do you have? How often are you doing that? Is that like something someone's regularly checking? Or is it like, oh, we think we're seeing some trend, something's come up?
I think it's a combination of trends and regular checking on the behalf of TPU in that sense. I can't really speak for them, but they regularly will forward overcharge proceedings to us, and we would do the review and such.
Just so I'm clear, so a tenant complains, it goes to TPU. TPU like tries.
The tenant doesn't complain. The TPU data mines the registration information to look at what they believe at the first blush is an unusual pattern, and they will contact the owner without first contacting the tenant, I guess. ORA deals with tenant-initiated complaints, so.
My experience is sometimes, and in my office, I work at the Urban Justice Center, we'll send a portfolio over to TPU saying, hey, we're concerned about this. So I guess, so sometimes it happens where they're independently investigating, sometimes it's coming to their attention. So if TPU says, oh yeah, we think there's an issue here, and then they send it to you, are you reviewing the entire portfolio of every tenant in those buildings for overcharge complaints, or are you just looking at, like, how are you determining we need to investigate, and what are you actually investigating?
It would be, the TPU forwards specific apartment complaints, not building-wide complaints to us are based on overcharges. We only have the capacity to do a specific apartment, at a time. I mean, we can do a whole building, every tenant in that building filed an overcharge, but we do specific apartment complaints referred to us by TPU.
So if TPU is investigating, like you said, there's no complaint, they say, hey, there's some problems in this building, we see the rents are doubled, we think they aren't complying, there's overcharges, and TPU sends it to ORA, what are you doing with that? Are you reaching out to the tenants? How are you proceeding if you think there's...
Well, TPU, what they do, I'm sorry if I cut you off, I apologize. What TPU does is they'll contact the owner, ask for information regarding the rent in this specific apartment. The owner gets back to TPU and TPU is satisfied, that would pretty much resolve the matter. TPU is not satisfied with the owner's response. TPU would initiate an overcharge complaint with us specifically. It's not so much, hey, you guys, we think something's going on here. No, they would file a complaint with our office, and we would review it in the same way as if the tenant had filed the complaint themselves.
So has TPU ever said, hey, we think there's issues in this portfolio for this owner or this building or this multiple building? Has that occurred in HC?
I'm sorry. There's probably, yeah, that would be more for TPU to say, but there have been more than one overcharge complaint in a building that TPU may have referred to us. I think that's what you're...
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, if there's a pattern or practice that we're seeing.
If there's a pattern or practice, what TPU does, and we can't really speak to all of their operation, but they will in fact...
We can more than we can, so...
They will engage an owner a little bit differently, and they'll use other tools to help, I'd say, remedy the issues or concerns. It may be a court case, it may be having a monitor there. There could be a variety of different things that they would do on their side.
Yeah, because there's over the years you file, there's owners who hadn't registered, and you wrote letters to owners saying, hey, 50,000 units aren't registered. How do we get these units registered? And if TPU isn't dealing with it, like, how does it get to you to deal with overcharge issues if TPU isn't sending you all 50,000 units
Their capacities issues with them also, but they do work very hard.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the Deputy Commissioner?
One quick question. Do you have the dollar amount of what the overcharges have been for the years that you refer to? So in 2017, you say there's 997 overcharges. Do you have a dollar amount of how much money that was actually? I don't.
We thought we included that information, but if it's not in there,
No.
we can get that to you.
Okay.
And could you also, in question 30, you say the total amount of MCIs was $1 billion. How much of that billion was actually was approved by HCR in that same 5-year period?
We can get that to you.
Just answering the question, and the question
Right.
said claim. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wondered if you had that data, could we get the answer to the question of whether, what was approved in that same 5-year period?
If I understand your prior testimony, the sense is that the average, or generally speaking, it's in the 70% range? Any other questions for the Deputy Commissioner or his colleagues? Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you very much.